watching the replay. She could hear us talking beforehand. Your mic's going. You can hear me all the time. Text my family and friends before the show starts. And welcome to College Football Now. I'm Brant Parsons. Beside me, as always, our national college football writer, Matt Murschel. A Thanksgiving week edition on Tuesday. I didn't want to come in tomorrow. Did you?
No,
You got stuff cooking already.
Cooking already. In my household, it smells like a restaurant right now.
So we are doing this today to kind of get a jump on the week because it is a big week. But we're also doing this somewhat blindly because the college football rankings come out tonight. So we don't know about the changes. There are changes are coming. We'll spend a little bit of time on it. I'm going to spend most of the show looking forward, a big weekend of college football games. But, of course, the big news coming into this weekend, Ohio State loses to Michigan State. They'll fall out of the top four. Clemson will remain there. You think Alabama should remain there. Then we're going to look at the rest of it, and you're looking at an Iowa team that is unbeaten heading into the final week against Nebraska and the Big Ten title game. Then you have the one-loss teams, your Notre Dame, your Oklahoma, and also there's one that I'm missing here, Michigan State, to possibly take that fourth spot. Right now we're just predicting, but where do you see it playing out in a couple hours when the rankings come out?
Well, I think, like you mentioned, I think Clemson's going to be 1, Alabama will be number 2. I think that number 3 spot and 4 spot are going to be very interesting. You know, whether it's, I think Iowa moves in after they were number 5 this past week. With their win over Purdue, that pushes them up. There's some thought process that maybe Michigan State, bumps its way all the way up there, pushing out maybe Notre Dame after their impressive win, over Ohio State. So either way, I think Notre Dame doesn't remain in the top 4. I think their close win over Boston College, even though they led most of that game, I don't think that's enough to keep them up there. I'd be shocked if it did. So again, I think that spot, that 3, 4, 5, 6 spot is really going to be at. I think you're going to see Oklahoma get up there as well. And then Oklahoma State, after with their loss against Baylor, I think Baylor will climb up too. So again, top 2 spots, we know we're probably going to be locked in. I think it's going to be 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that will all change after this week. We've talked about that. I don't think, once obviously this week gets through, rivalry week, I think you'll see a lot of that change. I think then you'll start to get a better feel for what this ranking is going to look like.
And when we were talking with a colleague about Notre Dame and bringing up how these rankings tend to be reactionary. It was small sample size just last year and this year, almost reactionary week to week, but then on the last one, they kind of pull it all together. So reactionary this week would show Notre Dame struggled against Boston College. Maybe they drop out. Oklahoma looked impressive for 3 quarters against TCU. Maybe they jump them in. Obviously, Michigan State with the big win on the road at Ohio State. But it's reactionary, and it doesn't matter the rankings right now. It matters are the rankings in 2 weeks. So even if Notre Dame should fall out and all the teams above them win and Notre Dame wins out, that doesn't mean they won't eventually pass them, just as we saw last year, Ohio State jumping past teams that were winning on the way in. So you have to think that by the end, the rankings tonight, while they're important, I don't know, they don't set anything in stone that a team at 5 can't jump its way back up into the 4.
No, I think what's important, so much more so than the 1 through 4 spot, is really, like I mentioned, like maybe the 6 through 10 spot, because I think, again, this weekend is the last last regular season, so to speak, for a lot of these teams. Then you move into the conference championship games. I think that's where you're going to see some of these matchups. It's going to be interesting where that team that's in the 8-9 spot playing, maybe taking on a 3-4 team. That's where you really want to see where can you get the biggest boost, because I think a lot of these teams are going to be looking ahead thinking, okay, if I win this game, does that give me enough to get in there? Does this win get me enough to get in there? We talk about with Notre Dame, this is it. They played Stanford, that's it. They don't have a conference championship game, obviously. So that's going to be a consideration. Oklahoma, if they beat Oklahoma State, they're done. They don't have a Big 12 championship. There's going to be a handful of teams, Baylor, Texas next week will be playing. But it's going to be interesting to see where some of these teams kind of line up, getting ready for next week with championships.
Last chance to make that first impression, if you will.
So to speak.
I'm going to go over just a couple of teams that are long shots, just get your opinion on if they have a shot to get back in this. We'll start with Baylor. You look at the numbers for Baylor, they're the best offense in the country. They have a good defense. They've been able to play well since the loss of Seth Russell. They do have that loss, though. A one-loss Baylor wins out, a couple things fall into place. Do you see them having a chance? What needs to happen, even if they have that chance to get in that playoff mix?
Well, they need to win the Big 12, which, as you look at, is going to be something very difficult to have happen, because you're going to have to win this weekend. You're going to have to win next weekend against Texas. You got to hope that Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma. I mean, there's so many things that have to happen. But again, that could help them, push in that direction. And you got to hope someone above you falls along the way as well, because again, I think the committee could look at that Baylor team and say, okay, if you win the Big 12, you did what we asked you to do, and that loss does come without your top quarterback, so I think that could maybe help them a little bit as well when you're moving forward.
Ohio State, they lose to Michigan State. This is the #1 team in the country coming in. They've been lackluster.
In the AP polls.
In the AP polls.
Yes.
Coming into the season.
Yeah.
They remember #1 in the playoff rankings. A lackluster season, an uninspired season. They lose to Michigan State. Do they have a chance? And, of course, this is assuming they beat Michigan. And I think you also have to assume there that Penn State beats Michigan State for Ohio State to get back into that Big Ten title game. But is Ohio State, are their chances done?
Like you said, they have to. I think it's the Big Ten winner goes as one of the Final Four. So unless, like you mentioned, if Michigan State loses to Penn State, Ohio State beats Michigan, somehow they find a way to get into that match, that Big Ten championship game, and then they beat an undefeated Iowa team, then I think you've got the best shot of getting in. If Michigan State wins and they go to the big, no, I don't think they do. But I think they find their way in the New Year's Six game, obviously, if they win against Michigan. Because I think, again, you look at their body of work, I think it's been pretty strong, and it really was a close game against the Michigan State team.
I think Ohio State beats Michigan on Saturday, then they're playing on the New Year's. They're playing in the Fiesta or in the Peach Bowl, I think. I think Ohio State's in the best position, so to speak, when you look at that. I don't know whether or not they can get to that playoff spot, and they need a lot of things to happen. And, again, it's not a given that Michigan State's going to beat Penn State, but, the way they've been playing lately, I think the Spartans are doing a pretty good job. Two more long shots. One right here in the state, the Florida Gators. You look at their record, and it looks great. But then you look at FAU, and you look at South Carolina, and you look at Vanderbilt. The eye tests, they fail. But does Florida have a chance to work their way into this playoff?
Well, again, you need a lot of things to happen I think, to have this happen. I think the best case scenario for Florida is Auburn beats Alabama, which would knock maybe out, and then I think maybe somehow Florida gets in there and beats an Alabama. Having looked at what the Gators have done recently, I don't see that happening. I think their biggest threat the biggest thing right now is they have to get past Florida State. They have to beat Florida State, and then they got to see what happens against Alabama and go from there. Because let's say Alabama loses this weekend, and then Ole Miss somehow becomes a factor in the maybe meeting Ole Miss.
Florida beating Ole Miss again isn't the same as beating Alabama in the SEC title game.
So again, you're looking at these scenarios. It's going to be very tough. You need a lot of things, moving parts to have it happen, but. I don't see the committee looking at Florida's body of work the last couple of games especially and thinking that they look impressive. But again, you beat a Florida State team and you look good doing it. It's always what have you done for me lately, so maybe that could help them.
I think they need a lot of chips to the fall. They need Stanford to beat Notre Dame. They need Oklahoma State to beat Oklahoma and TCU to beat Baylor.
Yeah, very much
and all those things happen, and then maybe they can work their way up. Last one, longest of long shots, North Carolina. Again, you look at the record. It looks nice on paper. If they knock off Clemson, they'll have the big win, but the things looming against North Carolina, you have a loss to South Carolina who was so bad their coach quit, and their non-conference schedule, it makes Baylor blush. It's so unimpressive. Does North Carolina have a chance to play their way into the playoff?
No, they don't. As you mentioned, those factors. Listen, they had to schedule 2 FCS opponents this year because one of their dates got messed up and the team had to back out. So having that on the schedule, I think we've already seen the committee has not really favored them. Even they're playing some of the best football right now. You'd think they would be higher up in the rankings. They haven't been. The committee has said they looked at that schedule. They look at the 2 FCS wins. They have to consider that. Even if they beat Clemson, I don't think it's enough to get in. That's the worst case scenario for the ACC is North Carolina beating Clemson.
That's another team Florida can root for. It's North Carolina. If North Carolina can knock off Clemson, that helps them also. Let's look back real quick at the weekend that passed before we start looking ahead and just mention them. I don't know there's a lot to mention about the state games. We'll start with Florida FAU. Talk to our boss about getting some hazard pay for watching these Gator games. They have been tough to watch. Florida needs overtime to knock off FAU. The Owls come in with 2 wins on the season, take the Gators to OT. Just a 252 yards for the Gators in this one, 2 turnovers each. Trayon Harris threw for 2 touchdowns, including the one in OT to McGee, but he was 8 for 17, 122 yards. The player of the game was Johnny Townsend, the punter for Florida. And what a get. I remember working National Signing Day. I don't know if you remember this, but he was the big question mark a few years ago coming out of Boone and signed with Florida. And boy, are they ever thankful for that. He really kept Florida in this game by burying FAU and not letting that FAU offense, I don't know what you want to call it, get its going. It was not a good offense. But Florida does get the win in this game. They did get 5 sacks. The defense continues to carry the Gators. And this is, I was on the Gator bandwagon before anybody else. I picked them to beat Ole Miss. I saw this potential, but I didn't think they would miss Will Greer when he left. But Trayon Harris, I think he's regressed. I think he looks worse and worse each week, it seems, by just game management and decision making, and the offense has regressed along with it.
Well, I think one of the keys for the Florida's going through right now, I think, is they're turning the ball over way too much. I mean, one of the reason that Florida got off to the hot start that they did was they were taking care of the football. They were making sure things weren't happening. They were making sure they were able to to get up ahead and to use their defense, and I think that's something that they haven't been able to do so much so early right now, what we've seen. And there's a definite difference. I mean, Will Greer obviously had a better handle of this offense and was able to get this offense moving. We just haven't seen that with Florida. I think the second factor is you look at what Jim McElwain said after that game. This team has lacked focus. They have lacked energy. I think maybe possibly winning the East so early on in that Georgia game kind of maybe set the tone a little bit. I think some of these players are just kind of maybe going through the motions, as we talked about before the show, seeing their schedule, thinking, well, we should easily win these games, and you see what happens. So we'll see what happens this weekend. If they come out and play the way they've been playing the last 3 or 4 weeks, they're going to get blown out by Florida State. And I think that's something that if I'm Jim McElwain, I think every practice, every team meeting, everything, it's got to be about the energy, it's got to be about the enthusiasm, because you don't want them to come out flat.
And I think they'll have the energy. The other thing that we've talked about, hard to just turn it on. Mm-hmm. And they've been sleepwalking for 3 weeks. And yeah, it's Florida State and it's the big game. We're going to talk about it later on in our pick segment. But it's hard to turn it back on when you've taken the foot off the gas. So it'll be interesting to see how they react heading into this week. Would have been a heck of a day for the SEC, huh? Citadel beats South Carolina, and FAU knocks off Florida in the swamp. Very close to happening, but didn't. So Florida maintains their 1-loss record heading into this, and their outside chance to be in the playoff. Florida State had their cupcake on Saturday, and they enjoyed theirs. They devoured it, if you will. Chattanooga, 52-13. This game was over at halftime. Dalvin Cook, 2 touchdowns rushing. Sean McGuire, 2 touchdowns passing in his first start since being named the starter this season. They played just over 2 quarters. They played the first drive of the third quarter. 428 total yards for FSU. Chattanooga, a very good FCS team, the Southern Conference winner. They are going to the playoffs. I don't think that they had a lot running on this game either. And we're mentioning it because we mentioned them. It's a paycheck. Florida State rolls on. They get the win they're supposed to, just how it's supposed to happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, this was a game that you kind of had the feeling that Florida State was going to get back on track, find out what they were going to do, and I think you just wanted to avoid any sort of injuries. You wanted to avoid, Dalvin Cook getting hurt. You wanted to avoid Sean McGuire getting hurt. You just wanted to kind of get your starters out for a couple quarters, build up a big lead, and then kind of get some young faces out there as well, because those are the guys that are in the future for your program. Those are the guys that you're going to count on more and more as you get closer to next season. So I think it was a good win for Florida State, but now you get it out of the way. Now you focus on the Gator game.
UCF was at home against East Carolina on Thursday night. I picked the Knights to win. We gotta stop drinking before the show. That's a real problem. We have got to put the bottle away because I was hitting something. And you know what? For a couple minutes, I felt like, hey, you know what? UCF's winning 7-0. They took the opening drive 71 yards for a score. Maybe I'm on to something here. Well, guess what? The rest of the game, they only gained like 160 total yards. This was ugly. East Carolina, 605 total yards on the game. They scored the game's final 44 points. East Carolina wins 44-7. We're contractually obligated to talk about UCF. 0-11. This was so bad, the ESPN announcers were ragging on UCF. This was a rough night out there.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at this team, I mean, you're trying to look for positives. You're trying to, you've got young players. I think what we've seen a lot from this team this season is because of that youth, because you have a lot of young guys, when they got down early on or where they get down in situations, I think a lot of these guys just don't have, they're not getting back up. I mean, I think if this team was more seniors and juniors and guys who'd been around, I think you could see them kind of brushing off some of these turnovers, some of those scores, and maybe getting back in the game. It's kind of like what we've seen in the last couple of years, but you just didn't have that this year. When a mistake happens, they just kind of, you could see the body language on the players just go down, you know what I mean? And I think this is a program, obviously, and so much change right now. They just hired a new athletic director, Danny White. They're still looking for a head coach. Hope to have that in place by, January 1, hopefully. So if that happens, I mean, then these things change. I think right now what I'm looking at is guys like Justin Holman. He's obviously had a difficult year. Injuries have hurt him, in certain situations. He hasn't looked like the Justin Holman that we saw last year. And I think defensively this team, has given up so many big plays. I think they need to find a way to kind of stop. And again, you're just right now, I think, having talked to some of the guys and seen their body language, I think they just want to get this season done with and move on to the offseason.
And they will on Thursday this week. And UCF fans, just so you know, Les Miles not coming to coach UCF.
Stop.
Not going to happen.
Stop.
Just
I want to pump the brakes on that right now.
Put it down.
I mean, some of the names, and I appreciate the passion, but some of the names you're throwing out there and asking me about are nowhere near going to come to UCF. And it's not a UCF thing. It's a money thing. I mean, Les Miles, they're paying, if he leaves, they're going to pay him $15 million to leave. He's not coming to UCF for a 1.5.
And UCF fans, you're making Miami fans look rational, and that's hard work.
But I
it's wishful thinking. But
I applaud the enthusiasm, but I just think you got to be more. I think Danny White's a guy. And I mentioned this a little bit last week, and I think Danny White's a guy who really can kind of think outside the box when it comes to coaches. The coach he hired at Buffalo, Lance Leopold, was won national championships at the Division III level, but was on nobody's radar on the FBS, so to speak. So I think bringing him in has kind of helped that program a little bit. You look at what he did with Bobby Hurley in the men's basketball program. They got to the NCAA tournament. Obviously Hurley left to go to Arizona State, but again, that's what you do as an athletic director. Think outside the box, get the guys you're going to bring in, and with the financial restraints probably going to be on this athletic department, I don't imagine them spending anywhere near the $2 or $3 million that Memphis and Houston are going to pay probably for their coaches.
And we were going to talk about Miami beating Georgia Tech, but there's nobody at that game, so it really doesn't matter. So we'll move on. Hey, well, we're going to do a bowl projection update, and not a lot of changes in my bowl projections. I was just going to bring this up, but then I want to bring up a more important thing going on. In the Cure Bowl, I now have UConn playing Akron, Connecticut, bowl eligible. Just a shocker there after they knocked off Houston, previously unbeaten Houston on the weekend. Russell, I have Florida State still coming here. I'm leaning towards West Virginia replacing TCU in this one. My thought process on this being TCU, assuming my bowl projections, I'm assuming a loss to Baylor, with Baylor being favored in that game. 3 straight losses. Keep them at home in Texas Bowl. Bring West Virginia down here. Kind of feed two beasts there, because I think West Virginia would travel well down here, obviously.
Yeah, they did
TCU
that a couple
would travel
years ago.
well to the Texas Bowl.
Yeah, and I think West Virginia, when they came here a couple of years ago, they traveled really well. So I think bringing them here to take on Florida State, obviously there's some Florida State connections there. Well, there used to be. You have a little bit of that going on as well. So it'll be interesting to see if that actually materializes. I know that would be a well-watched bowl game, and I know there'd be a lot of fans here.
A lot of fans. And obviously the other ACC team in the mix is North Carolina, and I still say Florida State beats Florida. They'll play their way into a New Year's Day 6 bowl. The Buffalo Wild Wings Citrus Bowl, I have Michigan coming here to take on Ole Miss. An interesting scenario here would be Michigan beating Ohio State in the game on Saturday. Ohio State falls down to the Citrus Bowl. Let's say Florida State beats Florida and Alabama beats Florida in the SEC title game. Ohio State, Florida in the Citrus Bowl. Urban Meyer versus the Gators right down the street from Gainesville. Tell me that wouldn't just be the biggest non-New Year's Day 6 bowl you could get out there.
I think that would probably be the biggest game. I mean, you think about it, I know Ohio State wouldn't be as happy because, again, not being where they want to be, but being in that game. I think Urban going back home, so to speak, he was here for the Orange Bowl a couple years ago, so it's not like he hasn't been in the state of Florida. So it'd be interesting to see that happening against the guy in Jim McElwain, who's really kind of is he the next Urban Meyer, so to speak, when it comes to the Florida Gators program? So
that'd be a fun game. A lot of things have to happen for that.
A lot of things would have to happen,
but that is,
again, we'd hope that Florida's offense somehow woke up before that.
So. or it could be a long day. Michigan, Ole Miss is who I have there now. Now, there are a lot of bowl games. There are a ton of bowl games. There are 40 bowl games. That means you need 80 teams to be bowl eligible. 63% of FBS football teams to be bowl eligible. Heading into this weekend, we have 71 teams that are eligible for the bowl season. That means there are 9 spots that we don't even have teams that have become eligible left. 18 teams that can do that, judging by the eye test, if you will, who's favored, who's not. I see maybe 4 or 5 of those being locks to get in. So we're looking at 3 or 4 teams that 3 or 4 spots that we're not going to have a team to fill. What is the NCAA going to do to fill this?
Well, I think they'll have to look at a special situation, with the 5 and 7 teams. You're looking at the idea that, you take a 5 and 7 team. There's a rule that they put in place last year that was based on the idea of looking at the academic performance rates of these schools, judging, taking the ones that are the highest rates and putting them in these bowl games. I think the bigger issue is this. If they don't fill enough of these bowl games, if it becomes a bigger number than what you're predicting, Brant, with maybe 4 or 5 or 6, there's a possibility. And I know, talking with some of the people out, some of the conference commissioners, they don't want to see this happen, but there's a possibility that some of these bowls go dark, where they don't actually play the bowl game because they just don't have enough teams to do that. That's something they don't want to do. And I know that the Football Oversight Committee met on Monday to discuss some of these issues. What are they going to do? What's going to happen? They want to wait and see what happens after this weekend before they're in that kind of position. Because, again, don't forget, some of these bowl games are actually being run by ESPN. So they do have the option to say, well, we're done. We're not going to air this bowl game but they're not going to do. But I think if they came down to it where you had 8, 9 teams that aren't going to, I think that might be something to think about. They don't want to because, again, you have communities that spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort to do that. But that's a situation that could come up that's the most dire situation that can happen. But, again, I think if you're down to maybe 3 or 4 teams, they'll take some of these 5 and 7 teams. I think there'll be a serious discussion after this year, really kind of looking hard at what they're going to need to do, because if they continue to add bowl games, and that's what they did this past year.
And there's one more on the docket
for next year. And I think there's going to be a serious talk about what do we do, and are there too many games? How can we do this? Again, ESPN needs content. And when it comes to this time of year, these games aren't created because they're trying to fit the best team. What it is this is about content, and that's what they're putting these games together for. Because a lot of these Group of 5 conferences are upset that maybe a 1, 2, or 3 of their teams get in a bowl game, and they may have had 5, 6, or 7 bowl eligible teams in the past. Last year, for instance, Temple was bowl eligible but didn't go to a bowl game. So the MAC had the same situation. Sun Belt is that's why most of these bowl games were kind of created in the long run, to kind of help make sure that doesn't happen. Now you're in the reverse situation where you just don't have enough eligible teams.
As somebody who does bowl projections all year long and hours on each, each year it seems it works itself out, but so far this year it's not working itself out, and you're gonna probably end up with the teams not making it. In the past, I've always gone, we're not gonna have enough teams, and you end up getting them. One other thing that I think to note is the moving away from FCS opponents, even on the top level, are costing some of the Power 5 teams that would be 6 and 6 because they'd have more cupcakes, but because of scheduling, you now have them playing more. Kentucky maybe playing a tougher non-conference game. They might end up at 5 and 7. If they would have had one more easy non-conference game, maybe they're 6 and 6. But just kind of, they want to move to a harder schedule. But by doing that, you take away some of those easy wins that teams have always kind of snacked on to get to that 6 and 6 record.
Well, and let me throw this out there and to think about is, if the college football playoff does decide to expand, if there is discussion about going from maybe 4 to 6 or to 8, I think that will also influence the number of bowl games there are. Because, again, you may have to move up some of those, like a semifinal game would have to move up a week, and that would, maybe you'd want to remove some of those games just to have, more of an impact in that. I think that could be a possible issue. Plus, again, you see some of these other bigger bowl games that were, non-New Year's 6 games that may end up taking on a bigger role into that were to happen as well. I also think you're going to see this year a lot of the conference commissioners and a lot of the ESPNs and everyone else are going to probably do a lot of under the table deals. Nothing wrong, but just more an idea of just and you have certain games set up for certain tie-ins with certain conferences. But I think what you could see is maybe some of that changing a little bit, making sure they get enough teams to fill these spots. So I think this is one of those years where I think they're going to take a long, hard look at it afterwards to see, is there enough to really talk about maybe when do you have too many bowl games? When is there going to too much is too much?
All right, before we get to picks next week, our sports editor, Roger Simmons, brought me this. It's on topic of just a moment ago, and University of Nevada coach Brian Polian is a possible candidate to become UCF's head coach. Two sources have confirmed that to the Sentinel. That he is being looked at. Polian is 40. He is a former assistant coach here at UCF. Of course, he is the son of Bill Polian, the former Colts exec. He was here as a running back coach in 2004. He's out at Nevada right now, and he is one of the names now being added to the mix for the UCF coaching job.
Well, an interesting name and not an exciting name, I guess, if you're some UCF fan. Maybe you're thinking, like I said, we mentioned Lane Kiffin and Les Miles. Now you hear a guy like this. But I think he's done a good job so far at Nevada. Replaced a legend, replaced Chris Alt, who was there for many, many years. So he does have that experience of coming in, replacing someone who's been there long withstanding, as you'll see with George O'Leary. I think he has Notre Dame ties, if I'm not mistaken.
He does. He was assistant coach there.
Yeah, so I mean, so that would kind of make sense with what we're seeing with Danny White, who went, obviously it went to Notre Dame, has that Notre Dame connection. His dad, Kevin White,
his father was the AD.
Was the AD at Notre Dame. So I think there's a lot of, if you're putting if you're really kind of following the dots, I think you could see maybe how that would be. I've always felt like with UCF's going to hire a coach, it's not going to be a big name coach. It's going to be someone they're going to bring in and someone who could take over a program and really kind of go with it from there. So I think that would make sense. Again, it's nothing confirmed or anything like that, but would make sense as a possible candidate for the UCF job.
And that's what we just posted on our website while the show was going on.
That's a good find.
All right. This week is a big week. We're going to skip over the Heisman watch. Well, Thanksgiving. We know it's a big week at your house because you already got food cooking and going. Lots of teams, lots of games involving top 25 teams. Of course, we don't know the college football rankings where they'll be ranked heading into after the 9th. But before we get to those games, just a quick pick. And if you want to make a comment about each game, you can too. But some big games out there. Alabama at Auburn.
Well, that's a game that Alabama wins. They win the SEC West, and they end up facing Florida in the title game. If Alabama loses, and Ole Miss wins, then it becomes Ole Miss. So I know it's a rivalry game, and it should be a blowout. I think Alabama's favored by like 30 points or something like that. Maybe it's 15, 20 points. I think this is always an opportunity. Maybe if I'm Auburn, you beat Alabama, and even though you're a 6-5 season, you beat Alabama. That's your national championship game, and you actually can upset them. But I like Alabama. I think Alabama's going to win this game.
Benefit for our Tigers, they do get Bama on the Plains. It is a home game.
Yes.
Alabama wins this, but I think it's going to be closer. I'm not a gambling man, but I think it's going to be closer than whatever spread is out there because I think Auburn just plays up to the competition this weekend, keeps that game close. Penn State at Michigan State. We mentioned this earlier. Michigan State wins. They're in the Big Ten championship game. They lose, opens the door up for Ohio State and Michigan game. Penn State has looked good at times. They've looked bad at times. They gave Michigan a little bit to handle last week, but they've got to go on the road to Sparty. Do they have a chance in this one?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the only thing they can hope for is maybe there's a little bit of a letdown following the big win for Michigan State, that the players come out a little bit lacking focus. I don't think that's going to happen. I've said from the start, I think Mark D'Antonio, the Michigan State coach, is one of the more underrated coaches. You consider the fact that he coaches in a conference where you've got Urban Meyer, Jim Harbaugh, James Franklin, big-name coaches. He's a guy that should be right up there as well.
The Buckeye in me says, Penn State wins this one. The only way Penn State wins this game is you do have to look at the quarterback situation. Penn State has a chance to get ready for two different ones, and how much did Michigan State spend on that win in Ohio State? If they come out flat, Penn State has a chance, but I think Michigan State wins this. I think they're playing good football, and I think they're in the Big Ten title game against Iowa in this one. Texas A&M and LSU, I'm bringing this game up only because the Les Miles story, it's unbelievable what is going on in LSU. I'm not asking you to pick a game. I'm asking you to predict if Les Miles is still the coach at LSU when the season ends.
I mean, you hear one camp says that he's they want him out the door right now. The other camp says that it's not true. They're not really looking at getting rid of him. I think there's obviously some discontent there. That when there's smoke, there's fire. So I think that the fan base is not happy with the way the season has gone. I think if Les Miles stays, I wouldn't be shocked to see Cam Cameron go. I think that they're looking for a new offensive coordinator because they need to develop that quarterback position. That's something that really hasn't happened under Les Miles. Now, if Les Miles decides to go on his own accord, if he decides, I'm tired of this and moving forward, which I don't think he would walk away from that kind of money, I don't see this happening. I mean, this to me, from being a number 2 team in the country to getting on now to being talked about being gone is incredible to think about, considering the amount of talent they've moved on to the NFL. But stranger things have happened. If LSU fires Les Miles, they better have a big-name coach ready to go. And that's why you're hearing Jimbo Fisher's name being mentioned for this possible job because, again, you don't make this move without having someone who's going to walk in and really impress you and wow you. And the only coach I can think of right now that would really fit that bill outside of Nick Saban would be Jimbo Fisher. And I don't think Chip Kelly's coming to LSU, so I think you could stop that.
And Fisher's response was, job's not open. I'm not talking about it.
Yeah, well, that's what I don't. As we know in college football fans, I mean, just because they say it, they have to say that. To be honest with you, and if there's been any discussions, it's going to be with not maybe with Jimbo himself, but maybe with some of his representatives.
And I say Miles is still the coach at the end of this year. I think this is the warning shot, and next year he's on the hot seat. And this is just saying, hey, we're getting a little bit disgruntled. As you said, get rid of Cam Cameron. They maybe move some coaches around, shuffle the deck. Next year, the pressure, I think, becomes more legit on them. I can't see them doing it this year.
And I want to bring this up. I mean, Leonard Fournette still has another year. And there was all this talk early on in the season. Should Leonard sit out next year? Should he just, get ready for the NFL? But, I mean, again, if you make a coaching change, if I'm Leonard Fournette and I'm unhappy with, the way the direction is going, I mean, he's from Baton Rouge, so I don't think that's going to be the case. But there's got to be a little bit concerned that some of these guys might bolt and head off different directions.
Last quickie, Ole Miss at Mississippi State. This game has a chance to have a lot riding on it, or it could just be the Egg Bowl riding on it. What do you see in this one?
Well, I think Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss knows that they still, amazingly, are still in the hunt for the SEC West and a chance to play in the title game. So I think Ole Miss will go out and try to win this game. I think Dak Prescott's put up some big numbers. We saw what he did last week against Arkansas. Set a bunch of records for the school and for the SEC. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I think maybe, You know what? I'm going to take Mississippi State in this one because I think Dak Prescott's going to really do what needs to be done. I think this opens the door for an easier game for Alabama, and Alabama gets to the SEC championship.
My caveat, Alabama beats Auburn, Mississippi State wins this game. Auburn beats Alabama, Ole Miss wins this game. It comes later. This is a night game after the game in Alabama, so that's my caveat on this one. Big game in the American, Navy at Houston. It lost a little luster with Houston losing last weekend, but it doesn't change what is on the line, and that is the West Division title. And if we would have had a Heisman talk, we would have had time to talk Heisman before the UCF news came in. You were going to talk about Keenan Reynolds, and that's the quarterback for Navy. He has scored 82 career touchdowns rushing. As a quarterback, I believe that is the most in FBS level at least. They come in this game 9-1, their best start since 1963. Well, the guy then was Roger Staubach, another pretty good quarterback.
A Heisman winner, by the way.
Heisman Trophy winner. They played for a national title that week. This is also the highest they've been in the AP poll. This has been a great year for Navy, and they come in now, and they have the top defense also, along with that offense led by Reynolds. They have the top defense in the American going against the top offense in Houston. It's on the road. Can Houston bounce back from their loss, and can Navy continue just their remarkable run in their first season in the American?
Well, first of all, think about what a coup this has been for the American. You bring in a program like Navy to play football. They haven't been in a conference. This is one of those.
They've never lost a conference game.
So you bring them in there, and then look where they're at right now. They're on the cusp, really, of playing in a New Year's Six bowl game. I think Navy wins this game. I think that Houston, obviously suffering that loss last week, kind of dampens some things. Although if Houston were to win this game, they would probably be the higher-ranked team. Maybe would be the one to go to the New Year's Six game. I think if you're the selection committee, maybe there's a little bit of kind of you're not supposed to, but you're maybe rooting for Houston to win this game, so you don't have to deal with all the mess that comes with playing next with Navy, possibly having to hold out a spot in the New Year's Six game after the Army game as well. But listen, I like Navy. I think Navy's going to end up winning this game. I think it's going to be close, but I think Navy ends up winning the West and going forward and playing in the American, the inaugural American championship.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. It's on the road. It's in Houston. Friday, noon start, but I think Navy has just been too powerful, and Houston kind of licking some wounds, maybe exposed a little bit. Tom Herman in his first year was doing some amazing things, but maybe exposed just a little bit against UConn opens the door for Navy to come in this
If
one.
there's one positive for Houston in this game, Tom Herman faced Navy last year as the offensive coordinator for Ohio State. So he does have a familiarity with going against their system, knows what's going on. But I still think Navy's just playing really good football right now.
The game before the season started that everybody had circled on their calendar, Friday night at 7:30 on ESPN, Baylor at TCU, meeting for the 111th time. And out of those 111 times, they've only been both ranked twice, I think was the number I saw in that. Just shows how the small time frame of both teams being good has been. But of course, TCU has lost twice. Baylor has lost one coming into this game. The Horned Frogs looking to reach 10 wins, though, for the 6th time in the last 8 years. Trayvon Boykin did not play last weekend against Oklahoma. He does lead the nation in total offense, over 400 yards per game. He could still play. He's not 100%. Bram Kohlhausen is the guy that will get the start for TCU based off his second half performance against Oklahoma. Baylor comes into this game. Their hashtag is America's top offense, and it is. They have 644 yards per game, and they're the only school in the FBS that's in the top 10 in both passing and rushing. It's at TCU, which is the only thing that makes me even waver a little bit. But I think Baylor right now has been playing better football all season than TCU has.
Yeah, I think Baylor wins this game. I know it's on the road, but you look at what Baylor's been able to do under Art Briles. The last couple of years have been pretty special if you think about it. And I think this is a game that Baylor knows if they win this game, there's a slight possibility, if Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma, that they could somehow wind up being the Big 12 champion. So I think there's a lot more riding on this game for Baylor. That'll keep them motivated. Jarrett Stidham, if he comes in and he plays, if he's healthy and plays like he's played before, I think they have a lot of, I think they'll win this game. I think TCU is disappointed, obviously, but I think this is still a pretty good season for the Horned Frogs.
At TCU, I showed some resolve coming back against Oklahoma, but I'm with you in this one. I think Baylor is just a little bit better than TCU, and that offense so hard to stop. I forget the number. It's like 19 straight games they scored on the first drive, and some high number like that for TCU scoring in the first quarter. Lots of points will be scored in this one on Friday night. I wouldn't want to be doing push-ups if I was the mascot on the sideline. Ohio State takes on that team up north on Saturday at 12 o'clock noon on ABC. Team, of course, is Michigan. I'm allowed to say it within the context of my job. 112th meeting between the two. The Buckeyes have won 10 of the last 11. This is Jim Harbaugh's first time coaching in the game. This game, a fun fact that I saw on this, they've been televised every year since 1967. And the first time this game was televised was back in 1947. This game has always been one of the games to watch across the country. It has been voted the top rivalry in different polls. Ohio State comes in this one licking its wounds after losing to Michigan State. The whole season building up to that Michigan State game, and they lose. They've got to turn around in a week's time and go play a hungry Michigan team that is having a year better than we thought they'd have. Jim Harbaugh has turned it around fast. Now they get Ohio State at home. Nothing they would like better to do than to ruin Ohio State's season even more with a win on Saturday in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, and I think, this is the matchup everyone was talking about. You talked about Urban Meyer with Ohio State, Jim Harbaugh. The handshake alone is going to draw, millions of tweets just to see, what happens, before the game. This is a game that's very interesting. I'm interested to see how does Ohio State bounce back. Lots of stuff going on behind the scenes. Ezekiel Elliott coming out kind of upset with the play calling, talking about how he's going to leave. I guess he said that was kind of already in the plan. He was going to leave after this year.
There's nothing shocking.
Nothing shocking there. Cardell Jones kind of hinting he was going to leave as well. I think this is going to be, the Urban Meyer said he's going to have more of a input on the offensive play calling. I think there was a lot riding on this team. This team, to me, reminds me a lot of the 2009 Florida team. I know Urban's been answering those questions a lot, but that's been something that I think you look at. I'm actually going to take Michigan in this game. I just think there's so much going on outside. I think this team had some things going on that many people weren't aware of, internally, I think, with some struggles there with Ezekiel Elliott. And I think Jim Harbaugh would love to get this win. If this was in Columbus, I maybe would say Ohio State, but I think Michigan wants this game. I think they want this a lot more, I think, than Ohio State does.
It's Thanksgiving. I don't want to sit at the kids' table. I'm taking the Ohio State University to win this, and I think Ezekiel Elliott is going to touch the ball on every play. I mean, they're going to give it to him all day, every day.
I think Jim Harbaugh's going to know that. So, I mean,
as long as it's not raining, Ohio State wins this one at Michigan on Saturday. That's my prediction. I'm sticking with it. Notre Dame visits Stanford on Saturday, 7:30 start at night on Fox. As we said earlier, this is Notre Dame's last chance to kind of flex its muscle, show the playoff committee what they're made of. They head out to Stanford. They haven't won there since 2007. Fifth straight meeting between these two schools where both teams are ranked, and the home team has won 6 of the past 7. Another thing pointing in Stanford's way on this one is Heisman Trophy candidate Christian McCaffrey. He leads the FBS 255 all-purpose yards. It's monstrous ahead of anybody else out there. He's having a quiet, amazing season for Stanford. This is his chance, his time on stage to show people what he can do in the Heisman race. And Kevin Hogan, of course, the quarterback there, a school record 33 wins. That's the most among active QBs. But this is, we've said it along for a while now, this is Notre Dame's statement chance, and they really need a statement after that Boston College game.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what's going on, especially depending on what happens with the rankings tonight. If Notre Dame is sitting at 5 or 6, even if they're at 4, they're going to they don't have a conference championship. They've got to look impressive in this game. They can't eke by on a last-second field goal. They've got to look very impressive. It's going to be a tough challenge for them because I think Christian McCaffrey is a guy who, as you mentioned, really is out there, kind of a dark horse Heisman candidate. I mean, really has the opportunity now to become the all-time, single-season leader in all-purpose yards, breaking a record held by Barry Sanders from 1988.
I may have heard of that guy.
May have heard of that guy. That was the year that Sanders won the Heisman, by the way. So, again, if he has a big, strong showcase as a runner, as a kick returner, this is a game that I think Stanford wins this game. I think it's on the road. I think Notre Dame's struggles, have been real. We've seen the last couple of weeks. You look at the injuries they've gone through. There's only so much you can kind of overcome, and I think they've turned the ball over way too much. I mean, 5 times against Boston College. I think if they continue to do that kind of trend, we know Notre Dame loses games. I think this could be the game they lose.
And I'm not having Thanksgiving at your house, so I have no problem saying this. I think Stanford wins this game also. I think Notre Dame has been playing as well as you can, considering the circumstances, but some of those things are starting to shine through. They really did against Boston College. If BC had any sort of offense, that game possibly goes different, but Boston College stuck in its own mire trying to move the ball. I think Stanford wins this one. Final national game we're going to look at Bedlam in Oklahoma. The Sooners visit the Cowboys. Oklahoma at Oklahoma State. The Cowboys lost their first game of the season this past weekend to Baylor. Baker Mayfield already cleared the concussion protocol. He was at practice on Monday. All signs point to him starting this game for Oklahoma. Big news for OU. Obviously, they're better when he's at quarterback. Assuming he does not have a setback, he'll be the quarterback for the Sooners in this one. We talk a lot about that 3, 4, 5, 6 spot in the rankings. Oklahoma 4-0 against AP-ranked opponents this year. They have won the big games. The big games they do not shy away from. Just Texas is the only time that they have not played well this year. They did outgain TCU 536 to 390. I was watching Oklahoma this weekend, and I've said this for a couple weeks. I don't know if there's a team playing better football right now than Oklahoma Sooners.
Yeah, I think, you look at what Bob Stoops did in the offseason. We talked about how, he really kind of rebuilt the coaching staff, really focusing on the idea of beating Baylor, beating TCU, getting themselves back to where they've been. They've done that. They've won. They've beaten the Bears. They've beaten the Horned Frogs. Now this is their biggest test. They beat Oklahoma State. They're more than likely going to have a good chance of getting into the playoff. I mean, I think you look at how well they've played against those teams. If they were to look impressive against Oklahoma State, if Notre Dame struggles against Stanford, if they lose to Stanford, I think Oklahoma's going to, and from the Big 12, is going to find their way in there as well. So this has been a good job. I think now that we know Baker Mayfield's going to be back, I think he's had a great year as well. Samaje Perine is really starting to kind of pick up pace after struggling a little bit early on. And I think defensively this team has done a pretty good job as well. If Mayfield's in there, I think Oklahoma wins this game.
And I've been high on Oklahoma all year, and Oklahoma has a little bit of an Ohio State last year feel to me. A loss, an inexplicable loss early in the year to a team you should never have lost to, but it redefines that you come back, refocus, as Oklahoma has. They've been playing just incredible football on both sides of the ball since that Texas loss. They win this one. Next thing you know, they're in the playoff. Nobody's going to want to play Oklahoma in the playoff. I have Oklahoma beating Oklahoma State, and I think they're going to play their way into those final 4 teams, just like Ohio State did last year. 3 games in the state we're going to talk about. We're going to start with Miami at Pittsburgh Friday, a noon start on ESPN2. A victory would give Pitt its 9th win. That would be the first time since 2009 it's won that many games. And Pittsburgh, quietly a good team. People may not give them a lot of credit, but their 3 losses have been to teams with a combined record of 31-2. They've lost to Iowa, they've lost to Notre Dame, and they've lost to North Carolina. Those are some impressive teams if you're going to have losses to your 3 teams in the top 11 of the AP poll, at least. Kadri Allison, may have gotten it right, he is the 5th freshman in Pitt history to rush over 1,000 yards. And, of course, Pitt this year coming in, this was going to be James Conner. He was going to be the showcase, returning ACC Player of the Year. He goes out early in the first game against Youngstown State. This freshman comes in. He's played well in the beginning part of the year. He hit kind of that wall, but did get 100 yards last week. Pitt with a chance to knock off Miami and continue a very strong, quiet season for the Panthers. Play their way up in that ACC pool of bowls also.
Yeah, and you look at what the new Pittsburgh coach, Pat Narduzzi, former Michigan State defensive coordinator, a guy who was getting a lot of consideration for head coaching jobs, eventually knew he'd find a program he would land at that he would be successful. That program has been Pittsburgh, and obviously they've done a really great job in what they've done so far this season. You look at the team overall. You lose a guy who was the ACC Player of the Year in James Conner, you'd assume your whole program, you're done for this year. But instead, they've managed to find a way to win. You talk about their losses with quality losses. We're talking selection committee speak, quality losses. I think Pittsburgh beats Miami this week, and I think they want to finish off strong. They want to get in that pool. They want to find themselves a really good bowl game this year.
I have Pittsburgh beating Miami in this game also, and like I said, a team that maybe if you haven't had a chance to look at, give them a chance.
Yeah.
Give them a look this weekend. They're a very good football team. That's Friday at noon. Thanksgiving night. We got to talk about this one. Thanksgiving night, 7:30.
Bring your
USF.
Bring your Pepto.
Visiting UCF. And I'm going to tell you, we've been talking all year heading into this that it was going to be UCF playing for a win, USF possibly playing for a bowl. Not only are the Bulls bowl eligible, they could still find their way into the American title game with a win here and a Temple loss. I mean, the turnaround out in Tampa has been remarkable this season. They started year 1-3. They're 6-1 since then. They've already beaten Temple, so they do own that head-to-head. Should Temple lose, that's how they would get in. Marlon Mack is running the ball well. He's got 8 rushing touchdowns. So does Quentin Flowers, the quarterback. And that was a question going into this year. Would he be the guy to carry the load at USF as quarterback? He has matured in that role. Willie Taggart, his job was hot-seated to now bowl game, possible American title, and of course, UCF. Playing for trying to get their first win against the I-4 rival at home on Thanksgiving night, ESPN there again. Oh, this could get ugly. This could be bad. This would be worse than leaving out the Thanksgiving leftovers for 3 days.
Well, UCF, obviously, you got some seniors on that team that definitely want to go out with a win if they can. Again, this is going to be a tough game. You talked about USF. What Willie Taggart did in the offseason was kind of what Bob Stoops did in Oklahoma. Really kind of cleaned house, brought in new offensive coordinators, brought in new defensive coordinator, kind of retooled this program. Said I want to go more up tempo on offense. More be able to handle doing the spread. Defensively, they wanted to be more aggressive. They wanted to be able to handle teams like East Carolina, spread teams. They wanted to be able to handle that. So we've seen the difference. You look at the numbers. I'll throw some stats at you here. USF this year is averaging over close to 33 points a game. Last year, they were only averaging 17 points. So offensively, they're putting up big numbers. They're also taking advantage of turnovers. Last year, they weren't able to do that. This year, they're +6 in turnover margin. I think that's been a big help for them as well. And as you mentioned, they are right there for a possibility of playing in the American Championship game. I've got USF winning this game. I think they'll win comfortably. And kudos to Willie Taggart for the job he's been able to do to really get this program, from going from 2 wins in the first year, 4 wins last year, to be bowl eligible this year and possibly competing for a conference championship. That's pretty amazing.
I got a stat for you. I had the +6 turnover margin. Another one I think plays in this game, 31 sacks for USF. They're going to put pressure on the quarterback. UCF's had trouble all year with quarterback pressuring against them. USF's going to win this game on the line and a lot of other places. The question is just how big does this get and how ugly does it get for UCF?
And I don't want to say this. I mean, if you're a UCF fan, and I know it's Thanksgiving, you want to go to the game. I mean, I keep saying this. I'm not UCF. I don't care really, honestly, but it's fun. It's Thursday night. It's football. Go to a football game and actually watch something. I mean, I know, it's easy to lay on the couch and fall asleep after you had your turkey, but go to a game, have some fun. Heck, go tailgate. Bring out the fryer. Fire turkey out in the tailgate.
Yeah, plenty of time to sleep during the game. There's going to be a lot of room to lay out. And Florida State visits Florida on Saturday. This is the final game we're picking this week. 7:30 start on ESPN. Florida State head coach Jimbo Fisher was asked this week if he had any favorite moments against Florida, and he said, yeah, I've got 4 of them. He's beaten Florida up 4 times. FSU 4-1 against the Gators under Jimbo Fisher. FSU seeking for their 4th consecutive 10-win season, 5 in 6 years under Fisher. Dalvin Cook comes into this game. Last year against Florida, he had 144 rushing yards on 24 carries. The Gators in this game, we've talked ad nauseum about their season and the turnaround under Jim McElwain. They come into this game 3.27 sacks per game. That's good enough for 2nd in the SEC. And also, they've only allowed 19 touchdowns. That defense, that's the 6th fewest among FBS teams. This team, Florida, if they're going to win this game, it's going to come down to their defense, what their defense can do against Dalvin Cook, against Sean McGuire, because the offense just needs to get enough to get done. But as it's been most of the season, everything starts and stops with this Florida defense in this game.
Yeah, one of the things that they've been able to do so far this season is really kind of limit the big plays. And that's something that Florida State really thrives on.
Dalvin Cook's the best at that.
Dalvin Cook's the best at that. But a stat that I found interesting about Dalvin Cook is 71% of his total yards this season, rushing yards, have come at the Doak. So you think about that. He's not a big, road guy. He's been hurt, obviously, in some of those games. But again, not a big, but again, as we know, he's a guy who loves those big plays. So if you're Florida's defense, you just limit him. You keep them from having those big plays. You keep him in front of you. You don't let him get past you. I think that could be a factor of Florida trying to win this game. I think also, if you're Florida, you want to make sure that Treon Harris is comfortable in that offense. You want to make sure he's not in anything that's 3rd and longer than 5 yards. You look at what Harris has done. He's only completing 47% of his passes on 3rd and longer than 3rd and 5, really. So again, those are situations you want to keep him, want to be able to take advantage of those first downs. And honestly, you also want to limit the turnovers. I mean, I was looking at this stat here. Treon Harris has 6 interceptions in his career in the month of November, 5 fumbles so far. So again, I think if you can keep those turnover margins down, I think Florida's got a chance with that defense if they keep it close. This is going to be a good game. This is going to be a close game. I think this will come down to one of the better ones we've seen. If it comes down to the kicking game, I'm taking Florida State.
Yeah, well, it comes down to the kicking game. There's no chance for Florida.
Yeah.
Now, listen, I picked Florida to beat Ole Miss. Everybody thought I was crazy. They blew them out. I picked Florida to beat LSU. People thought I was crazy. They were in the game until the end. I was a believer in this Florida team long before it was cool to believe in them. Well, guess what? I stopped believing in them when they played Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and FAU. I've been telling anybody that will listen to me for a couple weeks that Florida State was going to win this game. I'm picking Florida State. They go into the swamp. They break Florida hearts. Florida, come on down to Orlando. We'll see you at the Citrus Bowl. We'll have fun. We'll tailgate. We'll have a great time in Orlando. Florida, you're not beating Florida State. You're not beating Alabama. But you know what, Gator fans? 10-3, if someone would have told you before the season, you'd have taken that in a heartbeat. You'd have said, oh, please let us lose in the SEC title game because you look like you're going to finish 5th. Great season for Jim McElwain, and Florida State wins this game.
I mean, I just think it's going to come down to being very close. I think this is a game that if Florida comes out with more energy than they looked at, I think if they played better the last couple of weeks, I would think Florida would almost be a given to win this game. But they just haven't looked good. I think Florida State obviously wants to win this game. They have no playoff aspirations, to be honest with you. The New Year's 6 game, maybe, possibly. So this really comes down to just to the Florida State players want to get that big win, and for them, this is this win. They do nothing better than to ruin Florida State.
And then it comes down to a kick. Whoa, boy, you can't pick against Florida.
I don't know if anyone's. Do I have any eligibility left? I mean,
I could kick better than Florida.
I don't think I can get in
those
pants. So
3 missed extra points for Austin Hart. Just unreal stuff. Anyway, so there's our picks. Everybody have a great, happy, healthy, safe Thanksgiving. Enjoy whatever food you eat, because I don't like turkey, so I'll be eating something else. And I don't like stuffing or cranberry sauce or any of that stuff. But give me shrimp and I'll be happy. But enjoy all of your meals out there. And next week, I'll talk about how right I was in Florida State beating Florida and Ohio State beating Michigan, all those other things. For Matt Murschel, I'm Brant Parsons. Check us out back on Wednesday next week for College Football Now. Enjoy your Thanksgiving and check everything out at OrlandoSentinel.com.